HBO was wise to schedule Dune Prophecy to kick off the weekend after The Penguin wrapped up. The Penguin left us wanting more, and it left us with a gaping void in our lives on Sunday nights. So diving into Dune Prophecy was a natural progression. That smart scheduling and the recognizable ascendant brand name of Dune certainly made Dune Prophecy seem inviting. I only wish I could say that what we got on screen was as inviting. That's not to say that the show is bad, but more so that the show makes it kind of hard to get into it at the start. After a brief primer set in the past that stands as a cursory introduction to the state of the Imperium and some of the central characters for the rest of the story, you're dropped right into the middle of a developing situation that's unfolding across the galaxy. From there, though, it's a bit of a slog before things start to really grab your interest. And while it's not hard to understand what's happening at a surface level, to fully appreciate everything that's really going on requires a fairly deep dive into Dune lore. But I just see that dense amount of information and the slow pace at the beginning as pretty substantial barriers to entry for people to get into Dune Prophecy. At the same time, I actually think though that with that knowledge of the Dune universe and all the little bits of lore being referenced, the series gets a lot more accessible and, more importantly, interesting. And I think that your ability to appreciate some of that lore buried in the sands will likely make or break this show for you. But before we get down to the business of reviewing Dune Prophecy, let's get in a recap of the events of this season. So I hear some spoilers thumping in the distance. Based on the book Sisterhood of Dune and set 10,000 years before the rise of Paul Atreides and the beginning of the Dune story you're more familiar with, Dune Prophecy shows us the Bene Gesserit in its nascent form, which was, unsurprisingly, called the Sisterhood. Acting as human lie detectors for all of the galaxy's influential rulers, the Sisterhood seeks to manipulate events behind the scenes with the long-term goal of putting one of their own on the throne, through their machinations and the use of an extensive breeding program. The Emperor, Haviko, is the fourth leader of the Imperium, which was formed when his great-great-grandfather defeated the thinking machines in the Butlerian Jihad. And he and his family are the Sisterhood's main target for manipulation. Coming completely out of nowhere and standing in the Sisterhood's way, however, is Desmond Hart, a mysterious soldier who was the lone survivor of his contingent on Arrakis, and who seems to have been blessed with telekinetic powers after surviving a sandworm attack. He gains the Emperor's favor and becomes a trusted advisor of the court, but his identity remains a mystery, as does his latent disdain for the Sisterhood. As Hart uncovers traitors to the throne, the Sisterhood's plans fall into disarray and they see glimpses of their doom peering back at them, and Valia Harkonnen, the Mother Superior of the Sisterhood, can feel the walls closing in on them. They all envision the end of their order at the hands of this mysterious force. Eventually, they learn that Desmond Hart is the love child of Tula Harkonnen, Valia's sister and another leader of the Sisterhood, and a member of the Atreides family, someone she only slept with long ago as a ruse before she killed a large portion of his family with a mass poisoning. In the meantime, Hart, with the backing of the Emperor and a retinue of loyal soldiers behind him, has stepped up efforts to uncover further threats to Emperor Haviko. In the finale, everyone's plans start to boil over. The Sisterhood discovers that Desmond Hart's powers are actually just a virus employed by nanobot thinking machines, and Tula Harkonnen sets out to confront the son she sent away decades ago. The princess, the Sisterhood's agent who they're trying to put on the throne, is arrested by her mother, and Hart now works directly for her after Emperor Haviko rejected his counsel in favor of the Sisterhoods. Valia goes mask off and explains their entire plot to Haviko, resulting in her getting imprisoned, which was all part of her plan. Once in the cell, she frees herself, the princess, and the Atreides swordmaster, and they attempt to flee the planet with Hart and the Imperium soldiers in pursuit. Meanwhile, Haviko, having just learned that his entire life has been orchestrated by others, kills himself as it's the first and only decision he's made of his own free will. Immediately afterward, his wife kills the sister that had been working him all these years, and she then watches her husband die with disgust. During all these events, back with the Sisterhood, the long-dead ancestor of one of the sisters who is now controlling her descendant's body is rallying the remaining sisters against their Mother Superior Valia, and she destroys the thinking machine that the Sisterhood was using to run their breeding program. Desmond and Valia finally face off, and both seemingly get the worst of their little mind battle, but Tula arrives in time to save her sister. While under the effects of Desmond's virus, Valia has a vision of Desmond having a thinking machine implanted in his eye by another thinking machine, all under the supervision of some shadowy figure. Valia recovers and moves to cut out Desmond's eye, but Tula stops her. Tula then has a heartfelt moment of reunion with her son before her son has her arrested. Valia, the princess, and the Atreides travel to Arrakis, and the season comes to an end. Well, we've reached that point in the video where we have to decide if Dune Prophecy is a great watch or a hate watch. And this is where things get tough, because I think that there is a lot to like here, but it requires doing some homework to appreciate it all, and it's difficult to get into the show in the first half of the season. If you're someone like me, at least, who has just a baseline knowledge of Dune and only a moderate to somewhat above average interest in it. An interest which is largely buoyed by the two recent blockbuster movies. So I wish I had a clearer rating to give, but the very nature of a debate watch label means that the show or movie isn't clearly good or clearly bad, so that's what Dune Prophecy is getting. Not only can the story be hard to get into, but it's also not presented in the most interesting manner. The beginning is slow, fairly dense, and, ironically, the aspect of the show that they played up most going into the series, the sisterhood, is one of the least interesting aspects in Dune Prophecy. They didn't portray these women in the girl boss, she-can-do-it-all kind of way that I think a lot of people were worried they would. I mean, there were a few eye-rolling moments in that vein, but it's not central to their portrayal. Their methods, though, boil down to a lot of talking, research, and political maneuvering, and the show somewhat failed to make their bid for power gripping, as it's portrayed in this show. Also, it's open to interpretation, I suppose, but I can't really see any way in which they're not the bad guys here. Their approach is based on deception and blatant plays for power, all while no one wanted or chose them to run the Imperium, so I don't know about you, but I ended up rooting for anyone that stood in their way. Desmond Hart's mysterious nature and his rise to power, however, are certainly the most interesting aspects on offer for me, and his character single-handedly held my interest in the show. Hart's seemingly miraculous survival of the Shai-Hulud on Arrakis, his unexplainable powers, and his true identity are the only things I was really able to hang on to through those early episodes. And his part in the story and those mysterious aspects about his character stand in stark contrast to how the Sisterhood is portrayed. While the women of the Sisterhood are deceptive, slow, plotting, and boring, Desmond Hart is a man of action, and his forthcoming nature and mysterious origins immediately draw you in. But, unfortunately, by the time the season wraps, we don't get many answers to these questions surrounding Hart, and the ones we do get are lamer than what you imagined prior to their reveals. We don't get much of an explanation why his abilities falter and backfire on him when facing Valia, so it feels like a moment of convenience for the writing. And we have no idea who the shadowy person or people using him to go after the Sisterhood are, so there's no resolution to be found there. Honestly, the whole finale for me was kind of a letdown, as it didn't bring much of any meaningful resolution, and it focused more on the less interesting parts of the show. And what I thought was interesting before turned out to not really be that interesting. Now, I think the show relies too much on the brand name to really get people to turn on the show. I wouldn't say the show itself is overloaded with fan service or an over-reliance on name recognition like with the Atreides or the Harkonnens, but the uninviting presentation of the story seems to require that you have a strong interest in the Dune franchise to keep coming back each week. If you do have a real appreciation and knowledge of the Dune universe, though, I think you're likely to enjoy the show more than others. What's not up for debate, however, is the production quality of Dune Prophecy. Just about everything on screen looks fantastic. The sets, the costumes, the effects, the props. It's all tremendous. And I think just about everyone pulled their weight on the acting front, with a few standouts. Although that being said, there simply wasn't very much interesting acting to do much of the time. And Kwan from Halo will never get any praise from me, so she can fuck off. So even if most of the lore is going over your head, you can still find some enjoyment in Dune Prophecy. Some of the problems with Dune Prophecy likely stem from the rocky road the show took to get here. It's on its 4th showrunner in 5 years, and it's had changes in the director's chair as well as in the overall vision for the show since its inception. It's hard to say how much of an impact all those changes along the way had on the quality of this season, but they certainly had some effect. Audiences' feelings about Dune seem to be as mixed as mine are. Viewers have Dune Prophecy at a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, just clearing the rotten cutoff, and the show is having a tougher time on Metacritic, where it's getting a 5.4 from fans. That Rotten Tomatoes score has risen as the show's gone on, however, which I think is indicative of the series' slow start out of the gates. The premiere episode of Dune Prophecy brought in 1.2 million viewers around the time of its release, but HBO says that the premiere is up to 15 million viewers in the time since. Those figures put the show behind the likes of The Penguin, but they're still respectable even if the show isn't going gangbusters. In my opinion, whether or not you like Dune Prophecy will come down to how much you know and love, or are willing to work to know and love the Dune universe. You're rewarded for knowing the ins and outs of the lore, and it can be satisfying to do your homework, but the show can feel lacking without knowing those ins and outs. Luckily, there are plenty of breakdown videos out there that have done all the research for you if you're looking to take that Dune deep dive. And those barriers to entry for this show I discussed earlier are things that I don't think plagued the recent movies as much as they do this show. Although that can be expected in a series that has 6 hours to work with, and thus more time to slowly immerse you in its story. Regardless of my or anyone else's opinion of the show, it was already renewed for a second season before the finale aired. So the book isn't closing on this show just yet, and it's just as well because there wasn't much in the way of resolution this season. Did you give Dune Prophecy a shot? Did you have trouble getting into it? If you have a pretty good knowledge of Dune lore, do you think that added to your ability to appreciate the show? Are you going to be back for Season 2? Let us know in the comments below. Also remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to HateWatchers for reviews of other current shows and movies. Thank you for sending Strays Quan's way in a non-Halo video with us today. Merry Christmas, and we'll catch you on the next one.